So here's the question: how do we stop the teacher brain drain? Joining me now to discuss this is a teacher and commentator, Francis Gilbert, and primary school teacher, Natasha Finnegan. Natasha, you start us off. Would you be tempted to go abroad for a better remunerated life?
Definitely. I have actually worked abroad previously, and for me, it was all about the love of the job. It actually reignited the passion. I had smaller classes. I had a great relationship with the children, the pupils and the teachers. I was embraced in the culture. I'd be invited out for dinners with the parents, which enabled me to have a greater relationship with the children and therefore teach them to the best of my ability because I had the support of the parents.
And yet, Natasha, did you enjoy training in the UK, in England specifically, in terms of your teacher training?
Absolutely, I adore teaching in the UK equally. I've worked with some brilliant teachers that I look up to that love their job, passionate. I think some of the problems at the moment mainly centre around the fact that teachers are demoralised because we don't get enough pats on the backs. Instead, we're always getting criticism and quick fixes, more paperwork that in turn just stresses us out and takes the pleasure out of the job. And I don't think that the expectations for children are fair and realistic at all times.
Francis Gilbert, what would you do to retain staff? Would you say if you enjoy English teacher training, you've got to hang around for, what, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it might be?
I don't think there's any sense in sort of compelling teachers to stay. I think that seems very unfair to me. I think what we need to do is actually improve conditions of pay and service for teachers. At the moment, as Natasha was saying, the teachers are really demoralised and they're leaving the profession in droves, and we've got a massive recruitment crisis in our schools. And I think the government need to address this by improving teacher pay, but also improving conditions of service so that, you know, teachers aren't endlessly teaching to the test. There isn't the kind of absurd pressures around Ofsted inspections and the constant sort of data chasing that teachers are doing. And that is really forcing teachers out of the profession. The other thing that is happening is that because lots of teachers are under stress, they get ill, and then the people that are well have to cover them, and that means that they've got just far too much workload to do. I think that we need to kind of get a lot more resources into the system so that teachers have a lot more free time to reflect on what is good practice and to plan lessons and to really make sure that they're delivering the best they can. But the situation isn't good at the moment.
It's easy for you to say let's have a lot more resources in the system. The way the government finances it now, there's precious too few resources to go around as it is at the moment.
But it's a question of priorities, isn't it, Martin? What do we want from our nation? These are the future generations, aren't they?
Yeah.
And I do think that this government tends to prioritise other things above education. There have been quite big cuts happening in schools that people haven't noticed, and universities. And I do think that it's time for society to rethink, what do we want from our society? And that means putting the money in and putting the resources in.
I don't think teachers go into teaching for the pay. Personally, I wanted to be a teacher from 4 years old, and I believe a lot of my colleagues are the same. They're passionate about the job. So I don't think it's a question of pay necessarily. I do think the work-life balance comes into play. I think my sisters are both secondary school teachers. They mark their work, then they have to input the data, then they have to analyse that data, and then they have to inform their planning. And it's all unnecessary paperwork for their management to assess, and then people to assess their assessment of their assessment. And that shouldn't be what the job should be about. And I think that's when my experience of teaching abroad was completely different. It was about those children, one-to-one, small group work, and getting a good relationship. With my own classes, often I see just sub-levels and levels above their head, and I know what they've got to do to reach the next target, rather than knowing how many siblings they've got, what their hobbies are, what their interests are. And actually, if I knew more about the rounded individual, I could reach them quicker and better and take them further in their learning in a more natural way.
So, Francis Gilbert, we have a problem, don't we, that we hear this teacher's voice, as you've alluded to, of saying, simplify the system, just let the people teach. Don't
Yeah.
worry about
Yeah,
the
exactly.
bureaucracy.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
who have you got to persuade to listen to that? Because even Michael Wilshaw himself in interviews this morning was saying, actually, you shouldn't worry too much about Ofsted and don't prepare too much. If you're a damn fine teacher, you will pass all the tests. That's what he claimed, wasn't it?
Well, I do think we need to stop putting the pressure on very high stakes exams. I think it is ridiculous that a child and a school's future depends on a few hours that a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old does in an exam. And that's what this government has done. They've focused everything on these incredibly high stakes exams. And as a result, you get this endless teaching to the test happening in schools. It's not teachers' fault. They're just trying to survive, as it were. On the question of pay, I do think it varies throughout the country. In London, which I know very well, I just don't know how a teacher survives with a family on the wages that they're being given, and because there's huge rents. So I do think it varies across the country, and I do think the government need to seriously think about that as well. The other thing that's an issue is they've put a lot of money into training teachers for things like Teach First, which necessarily just keep a teacher in the classroom for 2 or 3 years, because the whole point of something like Teach First is that you stay for 2 or 3 years and then you find something else. I don't think that's an adequate way of training teachers. I think you really need to support the universities with their PGCE programs, which are much better at staff retention. And they have actually been cut back quite drastically in future years. So I do think that one way forward is to actually put a lot more money into the PGCE programs, the postgraduate programs in universities, and take it away from programs like Teach First that are just there really to train teachers to go in for 2 or 3 years and then leave, and that's what they do, and that's a
Natasha,
real problem too.
Let's just give the final voice to you as to what do you think the incentive would need to be if somebody's invested themselves in a university education and they've put them through a PGCE course to become a qualified teacher. What incentives do they need to stick at it?
Well, I think that you're not going to stop people working abroad. Teaching is a gateway to seeing the world. For me, I managed to see every continent as a result of that. But we do want to come back home, and I think there needs to be more education about making your national insurance contributions from whilst you're abroad, so that it's all fair. It's still putting into the system, and then when you return home, I just think we need more respect in the profession. I've been PE coordinator, and I've faced so much physical violence and verbal abuse at me that you haven't coached our 10-year-old adequately for this golf tournament that was supposed to be a bit of fun. And I just think it's kind of lost the whole respect for the profession and trust in us. It shouldn't be about results. It should just be about the outcome, how you get from A to B. It should be down to you. You should be able to be creative and flexible with curriculum and have fun with the children. Know your pupils best, know what's going to work for them in order to get the best out of those children.
Natasha Finnegan?
Maybe him.
Natasha Finnegan and Francis Gilbert, thank you both very much.
Thank you.